For those who don't know me, I'm Katherine O'Regan, and this webinar today is brought to you both by Cities Leadership Institute and Sydney Business Chamber. And I think that's really because we're in, as we know, unprecedented times, but it's how we collaborate together, both from a local government and a small business, to really start to think about ways to navigate through the challenges that we're facing right now and the way ahead. So we actually have over 100 people who've registered for the webinar today. So it will be one of those situations, if you have any questions, please use the chat function and we'll do our best to navigate through those questions and look to try and bring those ones to the fore that are burning questions from a number of you. I do want to also start by saying what we're doing today is looking at the health of the economy. If you've got issues in relation to health, then please go to the appropriate websites, particularly health.gov.au. What I'd like to start with is that we know local government plays a critical role. We've heard a lot both from state and federal government in terms of measures to support local businesses, but I know many of you have also been trying to do things on the ground that are impacting, to address the issues that are impacting your local community. We know that local government these days is so much more than roads, rates and rubbish, and over the last number of weeks there's been some really great initiatives that local government have done to start thinking about what is the response to the challenges that we have right now, as well as how we can go about rebuilding for the future. We have today two presenters. You may be aware that in the state of New South Wales there has been an appointment of a chief economist, and that's Stephen Walters. He's been in the job for about a year and looking at the health of our economy and what's actually happening during this crisis and how we can start to think about the rebuild phase of the economy. We also have with us Ben Lees. He's a principal advisor with the Office of the Small Business Commissioner. So really frontline work with small business. So those two people will provide a presentation of some of the work that they've been doing and some of the insights that they have in relation to small business. But then I will leave quite a good amount of time to start thinking about answering your questions. Because this session should be very much around solutions, what we can actually do to start bringing some practical answers and practical solutions to the response just as much as the rebuild phase of what we're confronting. In many ways, this could actually just be a first step. I'm more than happy, and we can address some of these issues towards the end of today's session, about what would be useful for you in terms of ongoing support, and whether that's through the Office of Small Business, or whether it's through the Chamber network, or whether it's through Cities Leadership. We're happy to start thinking about ways to keep you informed, ways for you to share ideas and knowledge, and ways for us all to work together. So I think that's enough from me just to kick things off, and we do have Stephen Walters on the line as well. So as I said, Stephen Walters has spent some time as the New South Wales Chief Economist. He's also spent some time working in the private sector as an economist. So he brings a beautiful, unique mix of how both government and the private sector work in terms of keeping our economy strong. So Stephen, we've got you on the line.
Hi, Katherine. Just wanted to make sure you can hear me okay.
I can. I'm hoping
Right.
everyone else can. And people, if you're having technical difficulties hearing us, again, please use that chat function, and so we can address it and pick some of those things up. And I'll keep monitoring my dashboard while we speak. So Stephen, thank you for joining us, and if probably in the next 10 minutes or so, if you're able to give your insights as to what you see is happening in the New South Wales economy right now, and maybe some of your thoughts on the forecast for the future. So I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Catherine, and good morning, everyone. So, look, this is evolving very quickly. So it wasn't that long ago, probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we were pretty clearly thinking this was a major disruption to both tourism and education, just simply with a shutdown of the visitors from China. And the impact on the economy was somewhere around 0.5 to 0.8% of GSP. So material, but manageable. What's happened since then is it's gone from being what seemed a fairly conventional demand shock, because the demand for our service exports had actually fallen away from one particular country. Once financial markets sort of caught on globally as to what was going on, it evolved very quickly and much more broadly through what I describe as a confidence shock. So we saw not only financial markets falling pretty sharply, equity markets particularly, but consumer behaviour changed. I'm sure you've all seen the footage of toilet paper brawls in supermarkets and people hoarding dry goods and so on. That's sort of a very clear evolution into a more confidence shock. But I think even more troubling since then is it's become a more, as well as all those other things, it's become more a financial system and even a credit shock. So sort of elements of what happened during the global financial crisis, albeit with a different cause. So the modelling of the first impact was pretty clear. We could evaluate how big tourism and education is to New South Wales, and we know they're both our second and third biggest exports after coal. So we could have a pretty good handle on how badly the impact would be and how it would affect the New South Wales economy. These subsequent effects, the confidence shock, we have a decent amount of ability, we think, to measure the confidence shock and what is going on in consumer spending. And by the way, the near-term panic buying, let's call it panic buying of dry goods and toilet paper and tin food and meat and Panadol and so on, it actually is having a stimulatory effect on the economy. So we saw the February retail sales numbers come out last week, the preliminary numbers, and they actually showed quite a big increase in retail spending, albeit very much concentrated in the food and groceries category. Everything else was pretty soft, but we can actually measure the impact of that going forward. And consumers, remember, are the biggest part of our economy, so they make up about 2/3 of the economy. So we can measure the impact on that impact. What we really struggle to measure is what's going on with the credit system and the financial system. So we don't have a final forecast as to what will happen on the New South Wales economy. We do think nationally that the economy is in recession. So remember, we haven't had a recession in Australia for 28 years. So most of the other economists that I'm in contact with, and bank economists particularly, are forecasting at least 2/4 of negative GDP growth here. A constraint for us is we don't get state output growth on a quarterly basis. So we don't get New South Wales gross state product on a quarterly basis. So we won't know whether New South Wales is suffering a negative quarter of growth. But I think given we are particularly exposed with tourism and education to China particularly, that if the economy is going backwards nationally, it's probably going backwards in New South Wales as well. So the things to watch over the next few weeks are how consumers start behaving. Now that the Premier and the Prime Minister have made some comments this morning about what they expect people to do with their social distancing and not attending public spaces, those sorts of things, that is actually going to have a material impact on the economy for the worst. So although some of these venues are able to stay open for takeaway and home deliveries and so on, closing down pubs and clubs and restaurants, cafes, it's a pretty profound impact on the economy. Just watch what happens with schools. We know the Premier this morning said that schools will remain open, but parents have the option to keep their kids at home. that's good in the sense that there's flexibility, because if there is an announcement that schools will close, like there has been in Victoria, then the impact on the economy is pretty profound, because you are taking a lot of otherwise productive workers out of the workforce, because they probably, at least one of them has to stay at home and care for younger kids. So just watch what happens with schools. I think what the Premier announced this morning is a good thing, that there's flexibility, but the schools will remain open if you need your kids looked after during the day because you have to go to work. And that is particularly relevant for healthcare workers who we need in the system, not sitting at home. So a lot of uncertainties. Financial markets clearly not reacting well. The Aussie share market's off another 8% this morning at the open. So extreme volatility there, albeit coming off record highs only about 4 weeks ago. But that's about 35 to 40% drop in the share market now. So that's telling you how profoundly serious this is. I wanted to just mention some of the stimulus packages that have been released. So the federal government announced another package yesterday, pretty material. So it's $66 billion on top of the $17.6 billion announced 2 weeks ago. That's very helpful. Just be careful about interpreting some of the numbers in there, because a lot of what is being provided is a loan facility, particularly by the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank also was active last week, announcing a $90 billion loan facility for the banks, term funding facility, basically at cash. So the banks can borrow from the Reserve Bank at basically zero and on-lend that through the economy. So that's a good facility that the Reserve Bank provided. The Reserve Bank also cut interest rates. Clearly, that's pretty much it for rate cuts now. They embarked on quantitative easing, so started buying government bonds on Friday, about $5 billion worth on Friday. So just be careful interpreting how big these stimulus measures are, because a lot of them are not direct spending, but they are loan facilities. But having said that, there is some very significant stimulus going on with payments to households, payments to business, and similarly in the state government, you would have seen a package last week of substantial increase to healthcare funding and some relief for businesses around payroll tax and other areas. And look, there's certainly discussions around further stimulus work that may be announced in coming days, or it may be subsequent that the Commonwealth announces some more packages. There is certainly more work going on. Just a few things to maybe stop us getting too downbeat here. Remember, we're coming into this situation with a very good fiscal position. So both nationally and New South Wales, the governments are AAA rated. So they have pretty decent fiscal buffers to deploy here. There was a surplus in the New South Wales government that is being deployed in last week's stimulus and may be used subsequently. The Commonwealth wasn't quite in surplus, but was in a decent position to actually provide some fiscal stimulus. Aussie dollar's been going down. That's helpful to the economy. It may not be helpful to all businesses, but it is helpful to the economy more broadly by lowering our price on global markets. So the Aussie dollar is going down as it should. I mentioned that share prices are off a lot. That is true, but they're coming off record highs of only 3 or 4 weeks ago. So just keep that in mind, that we have had several years of pretty outstanding increases in share markets. So these recent falls are coming off those highs. Our banks are in good shape. They're well capitalised, well regulated. So that's a positive, that the banks are in a decent position to help out here. And just one final thing, remember that there's a lot of reform that's being thought about here and about ways we can actually make our economy more efficient. I think a lot of those reforms will get accelerated here, particularly in the healthcare space, but I think more broadly about the use of technology as we're using it now, flexible working arrangements and other productivity enhancing reforms. So think about, as Katherine said at the outset, there's going to be a tough period in the coming months, but when the recovery does come, I think a lot of things would have been actually done and put in place that will make the recovery more sustainable and hopefully stronger. So the key is to get through that now. Hopefully the private sector can retain as many of their employees as they can with assistance from government and the banks, and that when we do recover, that there is actually a decent upswing here with a more efficient economy. So, Katherine, perhaps I'll leave things there and happy to answer questions a bit later on.
Yeah, I'll just throw one to you, Stephen, because I think everybody will be trying to think about how long it may take for economies to turn around. You know, we're getting some feedback saying we should be thinking about a 6-month period. Is that what's in your mind? Just to think about, you know, sometimes there's a bit of a lag effect with some of the interventions that are being announced. You know, what's your general view on timing for sort of a turnaround in a generic sense? We won't hold it to you because we know it's evolving.
Yeah, good question. So we base our economic assessment on what the health professionals are telling us, as is the federal government. So the health professionals, Dr. Kerry Chant is the New South Wales Chief Health Officer, and she's telling us that this is a 6-month episode, as she said. So we're basing our economic forecast on 6 months. So I'm hoping it's not that long, but there's a risk that it could be longer. So I suspect maybe prepare for 6 months. If it's shorter, that's great. It's a positive surprise. If it's longer, at least you've done some pretty serious preparation and are poised for maybe to adapt to a slightly longer disruption. But our base case, as you indicated, is about 6 months.
Okay, all right. Well,
the one thing to think about there is if you are putting in place any measures, and the government's certainly been advised of this, that whatever you're putting in place, be prepared to have those in place for 6 months.
Mm.
That's a long time.
Yeah, but if we plan for that 6-month period and it's shorter, as long as I think what you sort of said, if this is accelerating some reforms and we're able to be agile, then maybe that's, you know, a better way to go than plan for 3 and it ends up being longer.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Stephen. And so stay with us, and we'll come back to some of the questions that are coming through. And some of these questions can be quite economic, or they can be quite sort of practical ones. And so I know some of those questions are coming through already. So keep them coming and we will get to them. What I'll do now is, there has been a suite of measures, as Stephen has said, in terms of how can federal government and state government support business. And, I think that both levels of government will continue to make announcements as the situation evolves. But the point of today is also starting to think about what we can do from a local government perspective. But maybe just to start things off at a higher level, I'm going to ask Ben Lees, who, as I said, is the Principal Advisor for the Small Business Commissioner here in New South Wales. They have been doing a lot of work. They've been at the front line giving input into the response to government. And again, if that's sort of a beginning point, then we can identify gaps as well as ways that local government can support that. So Ben, we've got you on the line.
Yeah, hi there.
And you've got a presentation. Do you want us to
I do. So I'm going to put up, I'll see, and while the technology is going on, I'll just tell you that I actually started life, I started my working career in public health. I was evening counsel as an environmental health officer in the UK, investigating disease outbreaks. So this is all coming back to me. This is all, right up my street.
Okay, thank you.
So there we go. Shared. Katherine, give us a thumbs up if you can see.
Yep, I think that's all.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay, guys, great. So Small Business Commission. Today, I'll just talk you a little bit about some of what we've seen when we've been working on crises. There have been various crises that I've worked on, from the light rail, which is obviously a very localized problem for some businesses, up to the drought, which is obviously a massive problem for many, many businesses, and then over the summer, the bushfires, which again has been a really distinct sort of crisis location-based, but affecting huge areas of the country. So I guess out of these, there are some similarities. I guess the one thing I'd say up front is there's no one answer. There's no one answer for local areas. It does very much depend on local circumstances to an extent. So I'll give you guys some ideas on what we found businesses finding, and also what we saw that was really great, the reactions from local government. So in case you guys haven't heard of us, we're the voice for small businesses in New South Wales government. We do sit within Department of Treasury, but we work very, very closely with councils, with business chambers, with community groups. And as I say, we've had a role in many, many disasters, Lismore floods, the fires, and obviously now pandemic, even terrorism. So we've already spoken a bit about this. I just thought I'd let you know these are the kind of questions that we're getting about the support measures that are out there. So the most, I guess this talks to the role of people. So the Commonwealth are there to be the major funder of emergency support, and that's what we're seeing them do with things like the sole trader support through Centrelink. You'll have seen they've doubled the payment there. So most small businesses are sole traders. If they're not making any money, they can go to Centrelink and get their payment, and that's the sort of key support out there for small business at the moment. We also saw those reports a little while ago about PAYG being waived, half of PAYG being waived for employers. The new announcement yesterday, which I haven't quite got down to the bottom of how this 20,000 is going to get to the SMEs. We've obviously seen loans, instant asset write-offs. I guess the one thing I'd say about the loans is we've seen through the bushfires, even businesses very desperately impacted have been really, really scared to take on loans. They just don't want to do it. When we saw a direct grant come out, we've seen thousands and thousands of people take it up in the first week, but the loans have been available for 5 or 6 months and less than 1,000 people have applied. So I'd say just be very, although the loans, I'd say there's nothing wrong with them, absolutely terrific. I'd recommend them to anyone. There is a reticence from people to take them on, and that'll play into the advice that I'm going to give you in a minute. So New South Wales, obviously we do service delivery as well, and to that end, Service New South Wales is going to play a key role in this, as they did in bushfires, being the central point for support. I'd just say they're not up and running yet, so if you're looking for one point for all coronavirus small business information, there's nowhere quite yet. And as we did with bushfires and drought, we've on Small Business Commissioner started a website. The link's at the back. I'm happy to share these slides so you've got them. But I'm expecting Service New South Wales to boot up their like a coronavirus service. I don't know exactly what they're going to call it, but with business concierges and others to help. You've also seen New South Wales do things like payroll tax waive. That's been very, very well received. And this $80 million waived in fees for, they've said, cafes, restaurants, small business. I'm thinking this is through liquor licensing and other licenses that state do. Obviously, small businesses like cafes, restaurants also have a very big sort of footprint in local government land. And I haven't seen it. I don't think these fee waivers apply to local government fees. So the other things that we've seen, the mental health support and free business advice through Business Connect, and there is more to come, as Stephen said. So to talk about the role of local government, I thought it would be better to break it down. So what we see in every crisis is there's this reaction phase, which is when where we are right now, where we're all trying to get across the news. It's all still unfolding. At some point that'll stabilize and we'll have a period of adaptation where we have to get used to the temporary new normal and then get into the building back better. This is the medium and long-term recovery. So this is when we're getting up to those 6 months and we're thinking about the future. So I'll try to talk about what businesses go through at this time and what we've seen councils do that's been really effective. So in the reaction phase, which is, as I say, this is where we are now and what businesses are going through. They're confused, they're worried for staff, worried for customers. They're particularly worried about cash flow. That is the number one I guess, feedback we're getting right now from businesses is, I'm not going to be able to survive 6 months of this, so what do I do? As I say, at this stage, it's all still ramping up, so there's no central point of information. There's a lot of press releases coming out. Not all of them have a level of detail that speaks to what the business wants. And so that just adds to the confusion and the worry. So there is a lot of sort of community angst at this time, and businesses feel very alone. What we've seen, the part that councils play, and acknowledging that they are, have so many hats, right? So landlords, you provide the rates, you provide a whole range of services as a regulator as well, and also economic development. So through all of those channels, we've seen councils really effectively communicate with their businesses and start connecting people. There's almost no amount of information that you can put out there at the moment that's too much information. No amount of reaching out you can do that's too much reaching out. I think a lot of people are afraid. We find some areas, councils being afraid to reach out at this stage because they're worried they don't really have any answers. But I'd say from our experience, it's the best time to reach out because they're not expecting you to have answers. No one's expecting you to have the answer, but it's a great time to build relationships, which will play into how well it unfolds in your area later on. Councils that go early with things like, fee waivers, when you've got tenants, what are you doing with your tenants? When people rely on you, say contractors, when you're being very certain with your advice about how you're going to pay their bills, are they expected to work, just giving people certainty and confidence will build you a lot of credibility in the community and will make further things that you do a lot easier down the road. The other thing I'd say is it's never too early to connect with mental health services. We often see people not identifying as having mental health needs till the end, but actually from the very beginning you'll have people coming in, or certainly I've already had people calling me in tears with not knowing where to turn. I'm not trying to paint a down picture, I just mean just know where to refer to them, particularly in your local area. Often there's a local charity or similar that really dominates the area, so do make sure everyone in council knows what to do when they're coming across people who are very upset and in crisis. And I'd say, although it's good to have crisis training and sort of accidental counsellor training and bits like this, I'd say don't wait for the certificate, just make staff informed about and make yourself informed about what to do if someone phones up in tears or your staff come across people who are very upset. So adapt. At some point, we will stabilize to a new normal, and that'll probably come pretty quick. Humans are actually really fantastic about adapting. We were going to fire areas where, people's businesses had burnt down at the weekend, and they were saying, "Oh, when was that? When did that happen? Oh, it's been weeks since then, surely." But I guess what they're still going through is uncertainty. Cash flow is still a major problem for many businesses straight after, and often what they've done is put all those practical decisions to a side while the crisis is going on. But now they're, suddenly thinking, oh my God, how do I pay that bill? Or how do I keep my staff on? Exactly what do I do? And also, this is the first phase where they start actively applying for assistance and coming up against government forms and other things, which while everyone tries to do really well, is often from a consumer's point of view complex and uncoordinated, and no matter how good we get and how many behavioural insights we use to make forms simple, there'll always be someone who struggles. So we also find people having hope for the future but worries and again further crises. So this is what we see again and again. It's never over. It's never over when you think it's over. We even had towns where the fires came through. They thought, that's it, we can't be burnt again. And then the fires came through again and burnt the very last remaining bits. So, there might be one crisis followed by another crisis. For example, another example would be in the Blue Mountains where we saw the fires come through, but then there were, roads put out, there were, internet put out. That happened all up and down the state. So just different crises that come along. So how can you guys assist? Again, communicating and networking, it sounds very silly, but the number one problem that businesses often say is, I just don't know what to do. I just don't know where to turn. I don't have any trusted source of information. So beyond that, building this network of positive people who are going to connect people and come along on the journey, although it doesn't sound like a sort of council function when you're thinking about, well, how do I deploy financial resources, and how do we use our libraries, how do we use our properties? But you'll be shocked to hear that if you've got spare staff, if you've got spare facilities, then using those to boost communication and social engagement in your area actually makes a big difference. Again, if you are looking how to spend your money, local procurement and buying local, this is something that obviously we've tried to do. The New South Wales government has made some very sweeping changes with bushfire spending to try to get that spend local. And again, I don't think anyone would blame a council for saying we are just going to bring on local people to do local jobs at this time. I know there's a lot of red tape around that. The Small Business Commission has come out with a local procurement toolkit, which I'm happy to share with you guys to help you do it. So at this time, you have to be flexible and reactive. There might be ways, and again, it'll differ from area to area, but we saw many times in the bushfire and in drought, councils turning over their facilities to be used in innovative and different ways, whether through recovery or through helping businesses, who didn't have internet get in and use council facilities to run their businesses. And again, being very flexible with things like rents, with the use of their staff, and with the enforcement of red tape and codes. So whether that's enforcement of parking, whether that's enforcement of, food inspections, there's all kinds of ways that you can be very thoughtful in the way that you apply your services. And we saw some really fantastic things. For example, I'll just give Gilgandra a shout out, who bought, when the local Target closed down in the drought, they first of all just used it and then later on bought it as a community space where home-based businesses could come in and run run their business in the town. They also ran a series of night festivals. Obviously that's not going to work with coronavirus. They'll have to be, again, flexible and reactive and come out with a new way to do it. So building back better, you'd think that at the end of this crisis, it would be job done and everyone would be now thinking about, well, how do we go back and build bigger and better? What we actually find is there's a new phase here where businesses really need to make long-term decisions. They might have struggled through the crisis. Some want to improve. Some need to make really hard decisions about shutting down their business or curtailing it, or some sort of pass it on, sell it. A lot of people get through the crisis, but then they have to make these big decisions. Change is hard. A lot of people get to the end of this. I can imagine that by the end of this, we're all going to have PhDs in buying online. We're all going to be used to working from home. This is really, I think this coronavirus will be a changing point for things, and retail was not in a great space to begin with. So there are going to be people in retail land and in other places where the old way is just not going to work anymore. But changing is hard. So they will have to make very big decisions about those change, and they'll need help. So they'll also hit roadblocks. They'll hit during the rebuild, no matter from bushfire and also from drought. When there's been big announcements and big spends, we've also found that people have been very frustrated about red tape, about funding, about all kinds of things. And often, anger comes with that towards council staff and government staff who have only a very small part to play in that frustration. So how do you help with this? Well, again, it's about planning now, about investing for the future. So again, it's worth first of all, helping people make those decisions, helping bring in business advisors and others to help businesses that just aren't going to make it through this. And there will be businesses that just don't come out the other side for all kinds of reasons. It's about planning for and investing in the future. You know, we know that retail is changing. We know that times are changing. So maybe now is the right time for government to think about how we use our facilities. You know, we're all landlords. You know, state and local government are both landlords. You know, how do we advise our tenants? How do we help them to adapt? It's also about helping build the skills and knowledge, particularly online trading. It might be about helping that next generation of businesses come through you know, setting up some networking hubs, helping look at your procurement policies and seeing if you can start awarding contracts to new types of businesses coming through. It's also a really important part of government land to celebrate the recovery. So this is something that we've seen a lot of councils do and try to lead the community in celebrating as they grow and give them that hope for the future. But that takes a lot of planning. So I encourage you now to start thinking about what it's going to look like in 6 months' time, what measures you're going to take to you know, bring the community together to celebrate and to grow out of this. So thinking about what you want your community to look like in 12 months' time, in 18 months' time, and start the planning now, and giving those businesses that are going to grow and thrive out of this some targets and some ideas about how they can play their part in that. So I've also put together these resources. I'll share this slide so that you can look at them, but this is all the most useful resources that I saw. If you do go onto that Small Business Commission guide, you'll see that there's a financial hardship guide, which is obviously going to come in useful for a lot of people. Sorry, the writing's so small. I'll send it through. You can give it a good click. And I hope that was a sort of useful thought process. I'm happy to hear your questions later.
Thank you, Ben. And there's some good questions coming through. I just thought maybe, Ben, one of the programs which the Small Business Commissioner has been doing particularly well is the Easy to Do Business and the local government sort of business-friendly councils. And is there an opportunity for that to be expanded, whether that also assists, whether it's businesses or local government, to apply for some of the grant funding that's around? Is that something that's been contemplated within the Small Business Commissioner's office?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess that easy to do business piece has taken on a life of its own. So it's got its own branch within the customer service cluster of New South Wales government. So while we were played a huge part in getting it set up, it now has its own sort of staff who now drive it, and they're the ones who've handled things like the bushfire grants. They took it over and made sure it flowed through. So we are passionate advocates for getting any kind of routine processing and pushing it through them. I think they're going to be pretty busy in the short term, but I'd certainly love to see them play a bigger part in processing and grants, permits, all those things going forwards.
Okay, that's great. And look, I just will pause for a minute and let everybody know our plans after this is to send an email around to all the participants, and so that will include presentations and links to everything, and so those tools, whether it's the procurement tool that Ben's talking about or some of the other references. So everyone, please be assured that we want to keep the conversation and the information flowing to yourselves. The the webinar will also be put into a podcast for you to share it amongst friends and colleagues. The idea is, as I think we're picking up in your presentation, Ben, communicate is important, and to get some of that wealth of knowledge that is around, and sharing that as much as possible. What I thought I would do, and there's a couple of people who've asked some really interesting questions, and I also thought it'd be worthwhile hearing a little bit from people who are in local government. But first and foremost, I might flip to you, Stephen, and ask a question which relates to infrastructure, because one of the things that I think people have been hearing is how important infrastructure spending is important to keep that the economics going. And I often say that local government has a lot of infrastructure that they do it on a smaller scale. Is there a way and means that people in local government can think differently about infrastructure or change their infrastructure plans to start addressing some of the structural issues in the economy right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. So look, infrastructure spending is critical even without the coronavirus impact. Infrastructure spending is critical for our long-term productive capacity. So we need to make sure we're continually improving and upgrading our infrastructure, and not just in the cities, clearly in regions, and improving regional connectivity and communications and so on. Just in the context of this particular crisis, and we do call it a crisis, infrastructure, there is a big argument that infrastructure should be dragged forward. That would help. So if you do have plans that you are going to implement some infrastructure spending over whatever period in the months and years ahead, there is an objective to get that brought forward if possible. The constraint there, of course, is, and this is maybe more a Sydney story than regional areas, is there's already a lot of infrastructure underway, clearly. So there's potential capacity constraints here if we're trying to force more infrastructure spending down a pipe that's already pretty full. So in that context, perhaps an extension of that is maintenance of existing infrastructure. So whether it's public assets or just other public infrastructure assets that obviously need to be maintained, and we're aware that there's a backlog of maintenance in some areas and some assets. If that's able to be accelerated, that is a potentially really large stimulus to the economy, because the other constraint on infrastructure is if it's new infrastructure, there's a quite complicated and potentially extensive approvals process required. So with maintenance, that's much less the case, if at all. So given the imperative to keep people in jobs, to keep small business supported, and that long-term imperative to improve our infrastructure, I would argue maintenance expenditure, if that can be accelerated, that's a real plus. If you can drag forward other infrastructure plans, that's good too. But one of the things we've been emphasising with government is just try to get this maintenance expenditure dragged forward if possible.
Okay, that makes sense. So small projects, maintenance in particular, keep the pipeline going. So that will just keep, I think local activity, but also local employment, which would be great.
Exactly. I should have said that actually. Small projects are good. Like large projects are very beneficial, clearly, but they tend to have much longer lead times and much more complicated, require much more layers of approval. So small projects are good, but similarly, keep your pipeline going. There will be a recovery here, as Ben said, and I think I said earlier, there is a recovery coming. We don't quite know when it is. It could be in 6 months, could be in 3 months, could be in 9 months. So keep your pipeline developing, and when recovery does come, then you can fully implement the pipeline you've been planning here. You certainly don't drop the ball here and think there'll be nothing going on for the next 6 months. I think it's an opportunity to really prioritise projects.
And that sort of flows to a second question that I've seen come through on the chats, is about local government managing their reserves. So, we've definitely heard, I think, from the federal government that, the surplus is no longer and won't be around for a while. The balance sheets of local government, it does vary from council to council, but I just don't know, Stephen, whether there's some thinking there as to, we're bringing forward infrastructure spends, because from a reserve versus spend point of view, we should be more on the spend side. Is that sort of where you're coming from?
Well, yeah, government priority right now has changed. So I think 2 weeks ago, both federally and state, there was still a hope that we could maintain either a budget surplus in the case of New South Wales or close to it federally. So from a practical point of view, as you say, Catherine, those objectives have gone out the window. The surpluses are gone, not just because revenue is being compromised because spending's gone up. Yeah, management of reserves is going to be a challenge, and it will be idiosyncratic to each local council and each layer of government similarly, but there are new facilities available. So for businesses, as I mentioned earlier, there are loan facilities available through the official channels. The Reserve Bank on Thursday provided very cheap funding to the banks. So there are additional opportunities to replenish your reserves, but again, it'll be distinctive to each particular, whether it's a business or a council or a government for that matter. There are facilities around. The Australian Office of Financial Management, which is the federal equivalent of our Treasury Corporation, is providing funding for securitisation. So there's some creative things being done, but yeah, carefully managing reserves is important here, clearly.
Okay, and thank you. And so what I might do, and I'm sorry if I'm going to throw a few of the people on the spot here, but Gail, I'm just thinking as Mayor of Willoughby, whether you had any sort of insights as to the work that you might be doing, or even having a burning question. I'm hoping that you're there and willing to say a few words. We may have lost you. Are you there, Gail? I thought it would be nice to hear from a mayor, but
yeah. Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. That's fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Look, we've been doing a lot of background work. We've got a couple of pronged approaches, I guess. One is that we're very mindful of the vulnerable in our community at the moment, and really focusing on what we think is going to be a diminishing workforce from our volunteer perspective. So that's one sort of aspect that we've been focusing on, but we're also really getting our head around the impact to our budget, and a lot of the councils will be looking at their budgets currently and working out what we're going to be doing, because we're in a phase where we're adopting our budgets for the coming years. And I've got to say the numbers are scary, and we're really just trying to get our head around that, have our best guess as to what the impact might be, and what we can do to plug holes. Now, whether that be, and I know Stephen's mentioned about it might be an opportune time for infrastructure spend, how we finance that, what sort of appetite there will be from our council to take on debt, these kinds of issues we're still grappling with.
Yeah, and I think that that's where even this forum today is, if that's such an issue and an issue that we know is widespread, then we can dial up that conversation with state government and start to think about how we can address that, not just council by council, but more generically. So I think that's fantastic. I was actually then just going to throw to, I think, Julie McAlpin from Regional Development Australia. I know the RDA work across Australia looking at different sections, but I'm just thinking from yourself or your colleagues, is there certain things that are being done across the country, across the state, that have been quite good at helping small business that you're happy to share?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, look, we've recently just surveyed all the mayors and general managers of the 33 LGAs in Sydney. We had about a third responding, which was really interesting. And what they're telling us is that they really do need to improve support for local businesses. So we're reaching out to a number of people to see how best to do that, but it really does depend on the geographies of those cities. Obviously, those in the Western City deals have been given a lot more support than some of the others. So we don't have any silver bullets, and we're really just working case by case to see what we can do.
Yeah, and I think you were asking a question, Julie, about training. Did you want to share that with the
Yeah, look, I remember many, many years ago when we were in a major drought back in the 80s that the federal and state governments did come together to provide subsidised training for our farmers in those regional areas. And it was a fabulous opportunity to introduce new skills and knowledge, including innovations, to people in rural areas. And I think it's such a wonderful thing to do when staff are just sitting around. You don't want to let go of staff, so it's an opportunity to upskill. And I think it's something perhaps larger organisations can do and councils can do quite easily rather than let go of staff. There's so much material available in Australia and overseas, and I just think it's a terrific opportunity to upskill.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that flows into some of the comments there that both Ben and Stephen have been saying as to how to think about now, but also what can happen further down the track. And the other person I thought, which would be great to hear from the Sydney City Council, because there was, I think, a press release out last week, and I know we've got a number of folk from the city in the group today. But Libby, I was going to throw to you, I think you had a question yourself, but maybe also just to share with those who may not have had the chance to know exactly what Sydney City has announced as to what the city is actually doing in the short term, long term, and then maybe there's a question at the end for either Stephen or Ben.
Yeah, hi. Lara Wolski, who's my manager, is actually also on the call, I believe. Lara?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm happy to speak to this. This is fine.
Yes. Sorry, Lara, I didn't see you there. We've unmuted you both. Go for it.
That's fine. So, look, I just wanted to sort of make some general comments and then ask a question. At the City of Sydney, obviously, we really want to ensure that any of our support addresses business needs and is informed by our business communities, but is also really complementary to whatever the state and federal government are proposing or offering. Obviously, there's been some big announcements on all of those fronts in the last 48 hours. So last Friday, if you didn't see it, we announced stage 1 of our business support package. It's $25 million. We're calling it Business, Arts and Creative Support Package, using council levers to cut fees associated with regulation, waive rents in city-owned properties on a case-by-case basis, waiving fees to footway dining and markets, flexibility with parking and other infringements, and refunding bookings where of our venues and banners. Total value has been estimated at around 25 million. And so now I guess we're in a situation looking down the barrel of this week where we're exploring how we can continue to support the most vulnerable businesses in our local government area. Thankfully, the federal government addressed some of the really big gaps with its recent announcement, upping employment benefits, which will help sole traders who are out of work, and up to, particularly in the live music and creative and entertainment industries, that's going to be absolutely critical to keep that sector alive. And up to $100,000 for small businesses to cover their fixed costs. And that was the feedback that we were getting from all of our businesses and local chambers of commerce, was that it was really that need to be able to pay their rents, be able to pay their staff, be able to pay their utility bills. So that is so welcome, that 100K for small businesses. So in this current context, Monday, the 23rd of March, I was sort of listening to that great presentation by the Office of the Small Business Commissioner to try and summarise our role. And the way that I've really sort of interpreted that is, in the react and adapt phase, we see our role as, reducing council fees, promoting the support that's available at a state and federal level, whether that's the funding support, but also a lot of those fantastic tools and resources that we got pointed to just then. Promoting buy local to our community, particularly in that sort of adapt phase. We're starting to really look at, we always do that anyway as a local council, but what we're going to be highlighting is some of those incredible pivots that the small businesses in our communities are making to address, innovate their business models to address new consumer needs. We're going to be prioritising local procurement, or at least looking at what that might look like. That would be something that we're going to explore this week. And always, because we wear the badge of local government, and we have to always be a trusted source of the latest health and safety information, or pointing people to the latest health and safety advice. So that's the sort of role in the react and adapt phase, but then I see that the council really is going to play a critical role in the build back better phase. Already we're moving a lot of our training and development courses, which we used to run in sort of more of a physical environments with a lot of physical networking. We're now moving them online. So there's virtual training available for businesses that will really focus in on those skills that are going to be really critical for businesses: digital skills, innovation and e-commerce. And then I think in the Build Back Better phase, we're also going to be looking at you know, how we can bring businesses back together and communities back together. And there's something that the council does really well with our normal business support programming is, you know, providing those networking opportunities for businesses, supporting our local chambers of commerce with their activities to do that, and activating local precincts, I think is going to be critical in that Build Back Better phase. And we do that through our grants and sponsorships program very effectively. So that's a bit of a summary of the role sort of as we see it. But I guess I'm really interested to understand from the group, you know, any other suggestions, particularly from the businesses that are on the call, where they see any other gaps for local government to act in those three phases that I haven't sort of mentioned.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good one, and I know that we've got some people from different businesses and also the Chambers of Commerce.
Right.
And in your patch, Lara, I know Peter May is on the call. I think,
Peter.
Yeah, that you guys know each other. So Peter, maybe that's something you can pick up. Are there? I'm not sure if you had the time to go through everything, but Lara's given a good summary. Are there things that you're hearing from your members or conversations you've had recently about what are some of the imperatives that, you know, need to be done and may be addressed or not being addressed?
Thanks, Catherine. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Look, this has been really interesting so far. I spent Thursday last week virtually all day taking calls from businesses in CBD. I have to admit they were predominantly in the Rocks area, but they were spread around. There was a couple of points which have been covered. I've also been chatting privately to Craig, Councillor Craig, whilst we've been listening on video. Things like getting some form of relief from New South Wales government departments who are in fact the tenants, so New South Wales Property as well as Property for New South Wales, so we'll follow up on that. I think Lara's point about training, I've had a number of people ask me, what can I do? You know, my business is you know, in need of a lot of work. I need to re-educate myself. I need to retrain. What's available to jump into that? So I want to follow up on that with Lara and have a look at that. I didn't see that City of Sydney announcement, and I had a look on the website and I couldn't find it. So we'll follow up with the relevant people on that. In terms of accessing what was being talked about before in terms of the Easy to Do Business program, you know, what I'm hearing from, and look, it's not an overarching majority in terms of numbers, but at least 4 businesses that I spoke to on Thursday said that they just don't know how they're going to stay open, how they're going to pay their rent. Each of them have employees, what they're going to do with them, and I've got to start communicating the good information that I'm beginning to hear here in simple, small, bite-sized bits that they can understand how to start looking at applying for some of this support. One business I spoke to said that their business had dropped by 95%.
Yeah,
so they just didn't see how they could stay open.
Yeah, look, that's certainly the feedback that we're getting from our business community. I would just say your point about communications, that the announcement was late on Friday night, so we are doing our best this morning to ensure that, you know, as a city, we have all of our small business support information up on our City of Sydney website, so we will send out that link as soon as that's live. We're also planning to share information with our database of, I think it's over 5,000 business subscribers via a weekly newsletter is something that we're looking at, just to really, as you said, I think there was a really wonderful comment before about you cannot communicate enough right now, and it would be good, I think, for our business community, if you agree, to hear from us, you know, weekly as the situation is rapidly changing, and just to provide that sort of, you know, to curate that list of support that's available, not just at a local government level, but at a state and federal government level as well. And then obviously having, regular dialogue with our local chambers of commerce like yourselves, Peter, who, are very close to the businesses and what's needed.
I just was wondering, Ben or Stephen, some of the comments there that Peter made, some businesses may not get through this, and I'm just trying to think, is there, Stephen, any work from your perspective as to, is that, how likely is that? Are you sort of in your calculations around impact on the economy actually thinking that some of these businesses can't, pivot and continue post that, in that rebuild phase? And then Ben, from your perspective, I know that you've mentioned something about a business advisory service. How can businesses access that? Because they may actually just want an exit strategy just as much as a hold tight kind of strategy. So maybe Stephen and then Ben address those sorts of comments would be great.
No worries. I was seeing if Stephen wanted to go first.
Yeah, I think we need to be realistic here. Yeah, I'll just go first. Look, I think we need to be realistic about that some firms will not get through this. That's true. There's a lot of assistance available, as other speakers have said. So there are government grants available. There's the banks are providing repayment holidays. That's very valuable. I'm sure there'll be further government assistance coming down the pipe. As Ben said, there's lots of practical stuff being offered to business. But I think, there's a material risk here that a lot of firms won't survive this. So we do expect unemployment to go up a fair bit. So we're still running at very low unemployment rates in New South Wales of only 4.6%. We don't have a firm forecast of where that's going, but I've seen other economists who I respect forecasting 8% unemployment or above. So that is suggesting to you there are a lot of businesses here who won't get through this and won't be there for the upswing. We can try to mitigate how many there are, but we just need to be realistic here. And it is still very early days, but we just need to be realistic. As activity gets shut down by governments, as has happened this morning, that has a pretty material impact on many, many businesses.
Ben, what are your thoughts in terms of the support there for business to get through this?
Yeah, so we've seen in the past, businesses do go through a cash flow crunch. They do have, businesses can be quite resilient, but it's always the sort of casuals and people who get hurt first. We always recommend to businesses when we've gone to these bushfire areas or drought areas, get business support, and that can be through a trusted accountant or advisor. Often business chambers run their own local schemes, but there is a free New South Wales scheme, which is the Business Connect service. Anyone can just phone Service New South Wales, that 137788, any small business, and they'll be put through to an advisor who can help walk them through and help them do things like build a website, look through their books, look through their profit and loss, and determine what the best course of action is. So we've scaled up the scheme, and we've also, New South Wales government have eliminated the cap on hours. There used to be a certain number of hours you could get for free. They've taken that away now, so anyone who needs support can just get as much support as they need in that case. Often it means working with other advisors to get it done. But when I say businesses won't make it through, I believe that between the loans, the grants and other bits, any business that's viable and can make it through has a really good chance. But there will be businesses that have come into this not making money already, in certain, have other circumstances, or it's just not a viable business going forward. And I think they're the ones who need to make a really big choice early, because as we've seen through bushfires and drought, some people will exit with grace and dignity and leave a legacy where people can go on and start other businesses and get other jobs. Delaying it too long, I've seen it too many times where people delay it and they leave with massive debts, with lost properties and their livelihood in ruins. So that's why we'd always say get advice early and either decide that they're going to make changes, take the advice, take the loans, or exit, but don't hang on and delay.
All right, I will pass that to maybe another time and actually just say that one of the things that maybe is coming out of this conversation is that there's definitely a need to have that one place where you can get information. You know, all the ideas come from that collective. You know, so someone in the regions or someone in the city may actually have a great idea that can be useful if it's applied somewhere else. And so one of the things we've been contemplating here is we'll follow up with the participants today, as I said, not just with this recorded webinar so you can share some of that information, but also the presentation and some of the links. But also I'd like to hear any more feedback from yourselves as to what might be some of the gaps that you're seeing or you need further help to help to get small business through this particular period. Ben, I do think that portal, the sooner the better, that Service New South Wales has a portal that can be up and running. I know I'm not a technology person. These things take a little bit of time. I don't know if you know whether that's coming this week or next week, but it does seem to be obviously a priority from what I'm hearing from people today.
Yeah, they stood me up at my stand-up meeting this morning on it, so because they were working on trying to get it out the door. So I'm assuming we'll see it very, very soon in the next few days.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, I'm happy to put the conversation just on pause for the moment. As I said, I do want to pick this up again, and maybe it's even something that we can continue both online or a regular catch-up with yourselves across local government, across New South Wales, across Australia, because I know that we've got people outside of New South Wales here. But, you know, I think we are, as the saying goes, you know, we are stronger working together, and we are in unprecedented times. So the more that we communicate, the more that we share information, then hopefully we come out of this better than we are today. So thank you everybody for your time and for your energy. Thank you, Stephen. I know you've probably had a big weekend getting all sorts of things, because I understand Cabinet's, New South Wales Cabinet's meeting as we speak. So appreciate your time, Stephen. And Ben, you know, the work of the Small Business Commissioner never stops. So I know that you work around the clock as well. But, you know, I think the resources, whether it's the procurement tool that you talked about, you know, we definitely can share amongst the participants that we have today. So thank you everybody, thank you for your time, and I will get something out to you this afternoon just to catch up on any further thoughts or feedback or ideas that each and every one of you may have. So thanks again, and we'll sign off and talk soon.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Bye.